see if people have to. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for our second LinkedIn Live. So we're getting real pros at this now. Just to remind you that we are live, so we do have a chat function. So please put any questions that you would like us to put to Mark, and we'll get through the questions and let the expert answer them for you. So welcome, everybody. And just want to give you a little bit of an introduction into who Mark is today, our guest speaker. So he spent his career with high-touch customer-facing teams for some of the most universally recognised brands. His contact centre career started as a frontline agent in mail order. He quickly evolved into resource planning and contact centre operations, so he's got a wide spectrum of knowledge in the contact centre industry. His natural curiosity saw him connect the dots between customer experience and employee experience to develop consistent app support that started to democratize the relationship between a brand and its customers. I'm interested to know a little bit more about that because I don't fully understand that one. So I'm looking forward to getting to know a little bit about that one. And he looked also in one of his organisations into the world of answering the next call in what can feel like a never-ending queue. He turned that on his head and with a small team proactively influenced large customer segments to solve the problems. He led a team at Skype of less than 100 to support over 1 billion users worldwide. So that's quite significant numbers there. Most recently, Mark's been working as an independent consultant. He's working in organisations across a wide landscape of industries, and it's all around digitisation and looking at their plans to modernise their business processes and make sure that they've got better customer outcomes and a greater customer experience. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Julie. That all sounds really exciting. I look forward to hearing more about it.
Yeah, me too. And I hope you can see it better than I can, because there was a bit of a tongue twister there on some of it. So brilliant. So you've worked for some global and blue chip organisations throughout your career, Mark. Microsoft, Virgin Media, O2, to name just a few. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into the contact centre industry and the different roles that you've had?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. What started off as a family conversation around the barbecue with my Auntie Jackie, actually, really connected the dots to going into the call centre. She explained to me that there was lots of work, there was lots of overtime, and there was a new world being built inside a contact centre that really wasn't that well understood outside of call taking. And so Great Universal Stories became that first sort of landing spot. And it was from there that I discovered, workforce planning, reporting and MI, and the existence of these virtual contact centers. And that really fascinated me at the time, more than trying to figure out how to run large teams of call takers and team leaders, because they all seem to be struggling with one common problem, which is they didn't really understand how the planning function worked, and so resisted the planning function at the expense of doing a great job. And so what I wanted to try and solve at the time was, how can you create a great experience for the call takers that unfortunately does revolve around working at weekends and does revolve around late shifts, because that's when customers want to talk to you. And that became a plan for the next 10 years, trying to understand that. During the Millennium Bug, for those that remember it, I remember being on duty for Princess Diana's funeral, which was it was like the opposite day, when we knew nothing was going to happen, but we needed to be there anyway. And then through technology, my natural affiliation with the internet, although I was born pre-internet, really got me in touch with some fascinating companies, Virgin or NTL and Telewest at the time, O2 Telefonica, and then Skype and Microsoft was a real hot 10-year period where everything changed, really. You know, high-speed broadband, we moved away from devices into experiences with mobile and consuming data rather than calling. And then with Skype and Microsoft, the sort of emergence of this new economy that we live in right now, this Web 2 as it was, where we started to do more and more and more online, more and more and more on demand. And that meant that large communities were looking to achieve the same thing. And when you say that there was 1 billion users on Skype, it still fascinates me that we ever figured out how to resolve lots of common issues for an audience that was global, multi-language. And if 1% of them didn't get what they wanted, it was the biggest demand planning challenge I've ever seen. So, you know, it really kept you on your toes.
Wow, fascinating stuff. And so you started working in a consultancy, doing your own for working for yourself pre-pandemic, wasn't it? 2019. What made you do and make that move, moving from such corporate and huge global brands to setting up on yourself? That must have been quite scary.
Yeah, it was, but it was driven by 10 years inside large corporations meant that you did talk to businesses and leaders who weren't enterprises, who were starting up their own businesses and couldn't figure out how to jump from running their business inside an A5 notebook to capitalizing on lots of benefits of digital tools and solutions. But we're also exposed to customer behavior that was, you know, contacting them on email, contacting them on social media channels, and not contacting them. The phone stopped ringing, but the demand never went away. And joining those two things together became really difficult. And so, having spent time inside Microsoft, what was clear was lots of businesses wanted to become digital, but didn't really have any insight into doing it and weren't big enough to make a dent inside these large organizations. And if I think about CRM, you know, if you are running a electrical company in the northwest of England with 1,000 customers, you're going to find it hard to get Salesforce or Microsoft to really pay any attention to you. But what you want is all of those tools that they've got so you can meet your customers, you know, on their devices. So doing that was a catalyst for meeting some new marketplaces, meeting some new leaders, and sort of, you know, exposing what's behind the curtain of digital transformation. And what's become of that has now mean that lots of customers already transformed, and actually it's the businesses that were late to do that. And what we're trying to do now is change behavior, not create even more digital experiences. There's plenty of them. It's actually a behavioral shift that we're looking to do. And that's been something that I don't think I would have discovered staying inside a corporate organization and being a little bit too far away from where the action is, and being a little bit more customer facing really brought that back to life over the last few years. And it's been a great experience since 2019 with some great companies and some great leaders.
Yeah, you've been involved in some major digital transformation projects over the years. So I guess how do you bridge that gap between CEO and the operations? Operations needing to know that they've got to do all this transformation and getting the buy-in, on vice versa from the C-suite.
Yeah, what has been clear is it's been a tools first game, and so lots of CEOs have been attracted towards a new tool suite or more than one tool suite, depending on the organization. And what's been less clear is actually how the business moves at a granular level on the shop floor. And so when it comes to it, the tool can do lots of things, but it's only as good as the input that's given to it. You know, the ChatGPT is the newsmaker at the moment, but that's a similar thing. It's only as good as up to the point at which it got good data. And if you ask it a question after that, it doesn't really give such a high quality response. So connecting the real customer journey and the real customer experience to the idealized version of a digital future is what connects the CEO back to the working level of the shop floor. And with the best will in the world, not everybody follows the process, and not everybody follows the policy. And the ones who do follow the policy and the process aren't always the ones who get the most reward. and a digital transformation can actually make numbers go the other way before they accelerate forward. And CEOs sometimes lose their nerve a little bit at that point when a number resets itself to a new normal before accelerating to this new optimized state going forward. So I think that's one element. I think the second thing is BAU and transformation will always fight with each other, and it's really hard if you're working in that environment to know which leader to follow on a day-to-day basis. If your manager is worried about which call got dropped in the last 20 minutes or what to do with the next email that's about to arrive in the queue, while engaging you on a story that might be 2 years in the making, it's a really hard place for lots of organizations to work. So separation of business as usual from transformation is a key asset in any business as it's moving forward. And perhaps a different leader is needed to pick up the slack on one versus the other. Because, you know, if you're managing this morning and managing next week, you know, you can go mad quite quickly. And the people who need to adopt these transformations can see it, and they tend to take a step back and say, well, unless you've figured it out, I think I'm just going to stay where I am, and I'm just going to keep doing the same thing I've been doing, and I've been doing all right at that.
Yeah, so hold your nerve is probably the biggest advice you've got there for a CEO.
Absolutely, and a colleague I've been working with for a number of years says, you know, this is that moment when you're on the edge of the cliff and you've got to decide whether to jump, and that jump off moment, lots of people back away at that point, and that's really the point when value is right in front of you.
Yeah. Okay. So since the pandemic, we've a lot of businesses have accelerated the digital transformation rapidly to immobilize their people, get them home safely, and we're now in kind of the new normal, I guess. But during this period, a lot of the businesses that have recruited advisors, the advisors have never stepped into a contact center setting or into their working environment. What's the next step in terms of connecting the customer service and the front line with their colleagues and the brand, and to create a performance centric culture as opposed to, you know, digital first, being at home, being safe? How do we bring that all together now?
It's going to be fascinating that the return to work battle is grabbing the headlines right now, and whether, you know, companies should dictate that people are in the office from, you know, Monday to Thursday, or whether working at home is a benefit, you know, and therefore is a reason to pay less as opposed to, you know, paying the right rate. One thing I think that is going to be clear is that fully remote customer-facing teams will start to burn away a little bit quicker than those that have a common purpose. That means that they can look each other in the eye in the office and gather around the common issues that are causing them all friction. It's very lonely to be working remotely from a team of any size, but call center teams tend to be big teams, and they tend to have their own culture that is created, and often in the image of their leader. And for anybody on the call who's worked with a particularly charismatic leader, it does have a significant impact on A, the type of people who come to that organization, and B, the kind of performance metrics that matter to that organization, you know, under that stewardship. And so if I go right back to the days of cable, where the regions were powerful, each regional leader had a very different style. And if you worked in region A, you would be rewarded and recognized and managed performance and culturally very different from if you were in region B. And as those things start to come together, those groups and communities and villages need to really understand what the rules of the village are in order for them to manage that. And I think that it does mean that call center teams at some point are going to need to connect physically in the building, in squad sizes, not necessarily, you know, 1,000 people all at once, in order to reconnect with the reason why they work for who they work for. It's a core skill to be able to manage relationships at that level. If your job is to speak to 500 customers a month, you've got to be more than just your isolated self in your room who gets no feedback from anybody around you, and there's no checks and balances for if you're just wandering a little bit too far outside the guardrails that have been in place to protect the brand. So I think a return to a common space, maybe not the office, but a return to a common space, and a regathering of brand values and culture values is going to be really important to make sure that while you are at home and taking that benefit, that you're not forgetting what it is that you do and why you do it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now, there might be some leaders listening that were in the middle of transformation when the pandemic hit, or they parked their plans. What considerations or challenges do you think they now face after putting their plans on ice?
There's an obvious one, which is if it's technology driven, technology might have shifted quite a lot since you put your original plan together. And that could be good for capability, but it could also be good for price. And so the price of transformation, I think, is falling the more people are stress testing the different mechanisms, different routes of working at home. And, you know, having had the privilege of working with Skype and Microsoft for a few years, working at home was a thing in 2010, and it was a very efficient thing in 2010, because whether you were physically at home or you just weren't in Estonia or you weren't in Palo Alto, then you were effectively working in a remote scenario with the tools that you had available, and you worked away to become efficient and proficient in what you did. Fast forward now to an era where people are being onboarded with every calling technology that there is, and I'm with a company this week and onboarding to a Microsoft environment, and then opening up the laptop to find that Zoom's also pre-installed, and there are some clients who want you to use this channel as well. And so there's a great deal of inconsistency around what that looks like. I think the second thing is, and I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the leader of John Lewis's contact centers was there, and he talked about this notion of digital transformation is great, but if the recipient is sat at their kitchen table and they are digitally transforming to this new world of, you know, contact center as a service at their kitchen table, and in 5 minutes the children are about to reappear and dinner's going to start being prepared, then that transformation is going to be managed very, very differently than if you're sat at a desk looking at a large screen being told how you're going to transform. There are a lot of variables in that ecosystem. So I think those are important. And I think the final point is, don't forget why you're doing it. You know, the return for the investment is very well understood now from a transformational perspective for digital, but often it's under-delivered because technology. But in fact, it's because the customer behavior isn't changed. And if the customer behavior isn't changed in parallel with all this new technology, then the returns are going to be far lower than expected. So every digital transformation plan should include a behavioral transformation mechanism for customers, because without that, the customers will still ring. And Boston Consulting copied an article from The Guardian the other week where customers want to trust chatbots. They love the availability, they love the flexibility of that, but they only delight in a conversation that involves another human being. That economy cannot continue, otherwise transformations are largely pointless.
Yeah, interesting. So I just want to remind anybody that's online today, if you want to post any questions, we've got Mark here. If you're in the middle of a transformation project or you're about to embark on, haven't put it on ice, then please feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we'll get through to them as the conversation continues. So I guess now, Mark, I just want to move on to the problem that all contact center leaders are generally finding up and down the UK is attrition. And leaders are now challenged with higher attrition rates since the last recession, early 2000s, and higher than some that have ever seen in their careers. What can we do as an industry to address this? Is this down to the transformation we've all seen, or what do you think? What's your opinions on that?
I think there's a generational question that I'd love to be insightful enough to be able to look back to my 21-year-old self and answer it as a 21-year-old about to embark on a career. Because back then it was about agents will move for £1 an hour. I'm not too sure that the first level hires in contact centers are motivated solely by that, if at all by that. It appears that they are motivated by something a little bit more lifestyle orientated, flexible perhaps, and of course pay matters, absolutely, but maybe it's not maybe it's not the only decision criteria of which company you go to and which company you leave. So I think that's number one. Is it the gig nature, the ability not to be working the 9 to 5, and a split shift isn't quite enough? The classic conundrum of every planner is what you do with the 2 till 5 in the afternoon spot when nobody's calling, and so you make 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening as attractive as you can. But what if it's only 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and 5 hours in the evening? And there's something about how that works. And I remember talking to an Uber driver once who said they only do Uber to pay for the lease of the car, so they have a car for when they're not doing Uber, which seemed like a really exciting circular economy that they created for themselves. That meant that job got them that asset to do this thing, and they had another job to do other things. Like the lady never talked about paying the rent. She talked about owning a car. That was why she was at work. And so in the call center, there's the reason why you join and the reason why you leave. I think in the middle, though, it's the expectation of when you're going to do the thing you were hired for, it needs to be calibrated appropriately. And we were talking just before the call, the classic example of being hired in, particularly when hiring at volume, and you're hired for this, specialist job, perhaps, a tier 2 type job. But the tier 1 is drowning in a backlog. And so in order to get you some experience, we'll take you out of training and put you into tier 1, and then tier 2 never happens. And I think lots of customer facing teams lose that development cycle too quickly. And perhaps it's a positioning thing where a good customer service skill set is one about driving success. It is one about solving the problem that the customer wants solving, not the process that you're being asked to follow. And so having some liberty to be able to do that, the liberty to be able to make the customer leave the call knowing how to knock down the barrier that they thought was in front of them, is a really powerful skill. And that's not just about taking a call and following a script. So if I was starting again, I would be looking for a role where I had a little bit of flexibility to solve customers' problems in the way they describe them, protection in the form of guardrails that would allow me to go right to the edge of what I was able to do, and be able to do that quickly, not after I've spent 4 years learning my craft and then I'm allowed to spend 5% more on a goodwill gesture. I think that's something that is inhibiting people's ability to make that good career. But I think the key is people want to be successful, and if they're going to be customer facing, they want to be customer success focused. And that job description is being written for another audience. It's not being written in the call center, it's being written in the sales teams. And call center managers need to cotton onto that before all the talent that they're looking for is in sales driving success, not in service driving great success and great satisfaction.
Yeah, that's really true. That's definitely something to consider. So you Mark, you're such an ambassador for contact centers and how you can build an amazing career within the industry. What can we do to change perceptions of the industry to the external world who may not know what it's like in a contact center, but they have a perception of what they think it's like? What can we do as an industry to engage future talent and make the industry look like a career of choice?
Maybe contact center is a good place to start. Like, I don't know whether but I don't want to hang out in a contact center per se. I want to work in a great environment, and I want to have a purpose that I can tell my mates about. I want to work for a company that doesn't make me take the badge off. If there's anybody on this call who's worked for an organization, when you take your badge off when you leave the office in the evening and put it in your pocket so the locals don't know who you work for, will recognize that symptom of what it means to be a call center person who is therefore responsible for all of the policies of the whole organization, from billing to invoicing to refunds to pricing propositions. It's all on the hands of that first point of contact. So I think the contact center is probably a little bit reductive for what the job is. I think the job is about engaging with the customers of a particular brand and working out what it is that brand has done to make them realize that they need to spend some time calling in the first place. And I would like to think that a career in customer management revolves around seeing the problem in the matrix, if you will, of the organization, and deciding, actually, there are going to be 5,000 people affected by what I've just seen. I'm going to go and gather those 5,000 people, and I'm going to stop this before it even starts, and I'm going to give some knowledge away to them so that it can be prevented if for some reason it happens again. And the use case that I always think about now is, like, I don't think BT and Virgin get a lot of calls anymore from most people about resetting their router. I think that's like a commonly understood self-service thing that you deal with without even breaking step. I don't think Sky stop telling people that sometimes you just need to turn your box off at the wall and wait a minute and then turn it back on, and good things might happen without you needing to stop your day and call. And so this notion of great service being a proactive service when the fire starts before it spreads, rather than, you know, huddling around the table wondering what to do while the fire is spreading and then waiting for the calls to come, is not really going to be a great place for, you know, a modern workforce to spend their time. And so changing the angle of approach for what it means to be in a contact center, I think, is a great start and a real rebranding exercise. As I say, Ray at John Lewis, he talked about a different world than the traditional contact center. I don't know how formed it was in terms of, you know, normal as opposed to pandemic recovery and so on. But he made it sound like a very different place to be. And it wasn't just about a very different place to be and it was John Lewis. It was a very different place to work, and it happened to be for John Lewis. The brand played a secondary role in the conversation, the job played a primary role, and the culture played a primary role. And I think that's really powerful if your job is to make customers have fantastic experiences when breakage occurs. And if you've got large customer bases, you can't do it, you know, one after the other. You've got to find a different way of resolving that.
Yeah, love the analogy about the fire. Yeah, really good. We've got a couple of questions or comments in here now. So Martin, hi Martin. He says he loves the concept and phrase of guardrails. So wait for that coming up in a podcast on Get Out a Wrap soon. Yes, follow up to the generational question. 10 years ago, strong focus on phone calls instead of chat was blamed on audience preference, and that it would shift with the fraction of digital natives increasing. Mark, are you already seeing this generational shift in the audience and maybe also staff taking place, and the channel preferences changing, and where to?
Yeah, there's definitely, it's a great question. I think there's definitely a sense that there are generations out there who work on a groupthink basis. So the first people they ask when something doesn't work is not the brand that it's not working from. And I think gaming is driving that behavior. So if Xbox Live goes down or the PlayStation equivalent goes down, I suspect that those community of gamers are doing an awful lot of self-service before doing anything that the brand even touches. That gives the brand the time to go and get onto Twitter and go, hey, we've seen this and we're working on fixing it. Don't call, because nothing new is going to happen by you calling other than you getting frustrated. And so that community, I think, is starting to change the way that customer behavior happens. And they are probably the IT experts in the household that I thought I was, until such time as my 21-year-old told me something I hadn't thought about, and he slowly realized that I'm not that guy anymore. I'm the guy who asks questions, not the guy who answers the questions. So there is definitely a shift of that. I think the phone call is a fascinating one because it's becoming less convenient. I called my bank the other day. I got offered the chance to do it by voice, you know, voice ID. I didn't take it. Then I got asked to explain what it was that I wanted, and I did. It decided that what it wanted was not what I wanted and sent me to a different department. I hadn't done anything at this point other than speak to a chap at the other end who said, let me take your information and transfer you, but I'll do this so you don't have to give your information to the next guy. And we all know what happens next, right? So digital solves a lot of that because it maintains the footprint and the fingerprint of the interaction. And I think lots of customers are starting to see the benefit of that. What ultimately I think is stopping greater adoption of digital channels is bad implementation. If a chatbot cannot resolve, and all it can do is hold you there while it gives the impression that it's checking, and then ultimately goes, thanks for that, let me put you in touch with somebody who can help you, then that company might as well not bother with a chatbot, because it's just not going to solve anything at all. And customers are far smarter than we give them credit for. And so I don't expect that the readers of the Guardian survey I quoted earlier, where this new younger generation who were getting delightful experiences by speaking to somebody. I think these are people who've tried chatbots and have tried them outside of hours and have gone, this could be really good because I'm busy tomorrow. I don't want to ring at 8 o'clock and join a queue, but it didn't resolve my issue. So I guess I've got to call tomorrow and resolve my issue. And the agent will no doubt do a great job, but that wasn't the point.
Yeah.
The point was I didn't need to speak to anybody. Don't make me.
Excellent. And Martin's here again. Do you leave the badge on? Will also probably feature. And as you do. By the way, I worked for a bank and left my lanyard on in a pub, and some guy who had a problem with the bank started on me. That's your point of hiding your badge when you take it off.
Well, if my my wife was here now, she would explain how she had her door kicked in at the barrier because she couldn't reach her badge to get the barrier open on her way out of the call centre, and that gave enough time for her car to get a kick from a passing customer. So
Wow.
yeah, I sympathise and empathise with that scenario completely.
So what advice would you give, Mark, for anybody considering a career in the contact centre industry? It's obviously it's a really exciting time. We've had a lot of change. What advice would you give about what the timing of it?
I think there are two elements to this. One is I would love to post an advert in a contact centre scenario and be overwhelmed with applications from real customers. Real customers who go, I know what doesn't work in your business. Let me come and fix it for you. I'll do that. Rather than, rather than just an individual who go, well, I've done call center work over here. I'll go and do call center work over there. So there's got to be an element of, if you're going to work in, I'm not a fan of the phrase customer care, but if you are going to do that, you've got to care more than just about the job. So I think that's one aspect, and companies would do well to go and look for customers to come into their customer service center rather than leaving an empty seat at the table and going, that's for the customer, whatever. So you've got to do more than just nod to the customer. You should be trying to hire them in and hire them in to help solve problems. That's number one. Number two is every leader in every business, largely, and I'll park founders for a second because I think they're different, but I would suspect that the largest proportion of CEOs have come from either a marketing background, a finance background, or a sales background. And customer service jobs do all of those things all day. So if you have got ambitions to see yourself at the end of your career being a captain of industry or being a CMO of a big organization, then life in the contact center is a good escalation jump on point for that career. Not only because you spend time talking to customers, but you impact all of those other elements, and you impact the brand every single time you speak or type or send. You understand that, and once you can speak to the brand team and say to the brand team, hey, I don't want to be a brand person necessarily, but I do want to understand how I can be a great stakeholder to the brand team or the tech team or the finance team or the marketing team, and that means that your career is already starting to grow some breadth. But you've got to be good at your first thing before you get permission to do the second thing. And I would speak honestly and say that when I was starting out, I was obsessed by the next thing. Lots of managers I've worked with have said, you were good at the first thing, but before you got to being great at it, you started to worry about why you hadn't got the second thing. And so being great at the job you're there to do gives you an awful lot of authority to go and sit with other stakeholders and say, look, I'm not here to be a brand guy. You tell me how the brand works and I'll actively listen to figure it out. But when I speak to a customer, I'm the brand, right? And that's true. So well and good, the call ends and you get told off for not being on brand, but there was 8 minutes you could have changed that beforehand. And so I think it's a great career path, but see it for what it is. Every brand has got great customers, and if you're talking to them, you're in a unique position to find a career path that will suit you.
Yeah, excellent advice. I want to bottle some of that and turn it back out again. So watch for the some edits coming your way. So you mentioned you were at a conference a couple of weeks ago. Do you do any? Obviously, you've attended that large conference, but what other professional development do you do yourself, and how do you keep your industry knowledge on point?
I think having a access to a network of experts is great. I'm a big fan of not just having a an experience with something like LinkedIn, where you accrue a network over time of people that you're interested in, or you've met, or you've worked with, or you start a new job and you make 10 connections immediately because people want to know what you've been up to. But there are an awful lot of expertise out there with businesses that, to your earlier question about generation, seem to be far more open to the idea that they will give away their secret sauce as part of their objectives for a particular channel, and whether that is Twitter or LinkedIn or whoever that might be. But this influencer type activity does seem to be a little bit more free about what it wants you to know in order for you to want to know more, rather than teasing you with something that you might not know and then getting you to kind of buy in early. And so I think that's fascinating. I think secondly, it's having the force to remember to curate your community as well. And so if you're only surrounded by contact center discipline network who are looking at different and exciting ways of growing the contact center, but you don't spend any time with a agile product leader. The world is an agile product-led world, and so you've got to know what it is that motivates them if you're going to influence them. And so you've got to get comfortable with that discomfort of actually knowing that you're probably from part of a business that the agile methodology doesn't always shake hands with, because processes and methodologies tend to kind of conflict with each other a little bit. But if you don't spend any time understanding what a product manager is rewarded for, how a product manager thinks, how the agile methodology can influence what happens when you engage with the customer, then you're missing out on an awful lot of opportunity to be a better stakeholder in the business. And sometimes you've got to put a wall up because you've got to protect the customer. But more often you should be looking at ways to be a great stakeholder and going, actually, in order for me to do a great job with this customer, I might have to explain why the app does what it does, rather than fixing what the app does for this particular user. And that's a very different mindset.
Yeah, great. What would you say? Obviously, you've got a wealth of experience. What's been more important for you, your education or your career and your experience?
My career and experience. I decided to consciously not pursue education after secondary school. It just wasn't for me. And if I'd have done it, I'd have done things I was comfortable with. I probably would have gone and done disciplines in higher education that I learned on the job when I was being a planner, and I got to hang around with people who had been through that cycle and were applying data science. It wasn't called that at the time, but data science to planning, and I learned an awful lot from people like that. And they are people who are close to me in my network, who I held on to, because it reminds me of that need to go and spend time with different stakeholders and to recognize that life experience is great, but university experience is really powerful too. And there are things that data scientists see and problems that they look at which are exponentially more impactful than what MI and planning was back in the day. But they do need input. They do need input into what's going on. And if you can bottle up the idea that when this happens, there's a subset community of people that your data isn't looking for, but they represent this larger audience of people who don't ever present themselves. And so, in large contact centers, cold coding, general inquiry doesn't really give you very much. Forcing people to cold code correctly just isolates people who don't want to do it. But you've got to find another way to understand that. Every time the bill goes out and 500 people ring you on the back of the bill, there must be another good chunk of people somewhere else complaining about the bill in their groups and making decisions about the brand without letting you know what those decisions are. And it's only when they're not there anymore you realize that actually they were churning in real time. They weren't, quiet quitting, I guess. Customers must quiet quit too, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got a huge network on LinkedIn. You've worked with some amazing leaders throughout your career. Who inspires you? Is there any role models that you would, somebody looking at following your kind of footsteps that you think should be following, or things they should be listening to?
Yeah, I think there were two leadership teams that formed that really changed my professional life completely. The leadership team at O2, when the iPhone was launched in 2006-07, So, led by Cheryl Black, who I knew when I was at Cable as well. They did things that were different, with the privilege of Telefonica's backing, and the CEO at the time saying, as long as we deliver our numbers, Telefonica will give us the leeway to go and plough our own furrow. And I think that, I'd like to think that mentality helped when it came down to the iPhone decision making. But that team was really, really strong across all of its cohorts, and everybody who was involved in that team is doing amazing things. And Gareth is the Chief Commercial Officer for the mobile side now at the new Virgin Mobile O2, and he was schooled in that same place. And so the other leaders who aren't at O2 right now are doing amazing things as well. So I would definitely cite that group. And that comes with the caveat that was the day, Cheryl was there the day I decided I didn't want to do planning anymore. And she taught me that when you're going to quit, make sure you know you're going to quit, and don't accidentally quit. And it was a real big life lesson at the time when I, casually mentioned I didn't want to do planning anymore. And the next thing I was talking to HR about what I was going to do next, and perhaps not with O2. So it's a real moment in time for me. And then, and it's hard then to bypass the amazing period between 2010 and 2016 with Skype. It was almost like 5 careers in one at the time. Formation of the new business outside of eBay, right through to the acquisition by Microsoft. The business operations team that was put together to do things differently for that business was an incredible bunch with Neil and Jason and a bunch of other characters around at the time. And Lowry Powell, who controlled all of the vast majority of telco minutes around the world, and had incredible influence over what was happening in this voice over IP world that we're in at the time. But it had 1 billion customers, and so the normal rules couldn't apply. We couldn't build a call center, no matter how many people asked for one, because even if it just cost a penny per call, that was going to drive 1 billion pennies of cost. Like, for a product that's free, you can't think that way. You've got to think differently. And I think that's what formulated this notion of getting first into the market with a community way of thinking around support and around customer bases. I think that really changed things. But if it wasn't for that group sitting in a room and going, everybody's asking for a call center, and if we don't come up with something better, we're going to get dragged into a call center debate, kicking and screaming. So we're going to have to build something different. And building that community, I think, was a market-changing event for communities that we see in the early 2020s. And it was great to have been there when it happened.
Yeah, fantastic. So I know you mentioned a couple of scenarios there about make sure you know you're quitting when you actually quit. But what is that one of the most valuable lessons you think you've learned throughout your career, or have there been others?
Yeah, there have been plenty. I think the role of a people leader cannot be underestimated. And never should be underestimated. When I was starting out in planning, I didn't really pay much attention to the fact that the call center leaders were doing anything other than trying to make the plan worse. So your mindset is the plan's the plan, and therefore anything less than the plan is suboptimal. And actually, there's an awful lot that goes into negotiating what that outcome really looks like. And so storytelling. It definitely wasn't storytelling back then, but the art of storytelling is what drew me towards actually becoming a good stakeholder for marketing, because you would sit with marketing and go, I feel like I want to buy that thing and I work here. And so, being in a room when storytellers are telling stories really turns your head around in terms of how data is presented and how influence is gathered over time. And that's really sort of stuck with me for a long time now. I think the second piece is hiring is really hard, and hiring specialists is just as hard as hiring generalists. And every manager wants more headcount, but when they get it, they're really bad at fulfilling it. And so we in that statement. And so that teaches you to look at not just efficiency, but what's the way to solve a problem with the least amount of friction. And if you do need to hire somebody, then that's the right amount of friction. But you've got to really lean into the process of hiring somebody, because the people at the other end of that all want the job. and they need to be treated like they could all get that job until the filtering takes them down. But they've got to be managed through that process, because remember, if you're going to hire customers, I don't think I've ever been asked if I'm a customer of a brand I've applied to go and work for. I don't think that that's ever come up. So the hiring process is really, really important. If you believe the idea that one bad experience influences 10 people, then the hiring experience is in that mix as well, just like the call center experience is in the mix. And so, hiring with intention is really, really important. And I think the last thing I would call out is you can't solve the problem one ticket at a time or one call at a time. You've got to go and look for scale, and then you've got to figure out how to channel that scale appropriately. And the great use case at Skype was the password reset process was always causing demand into the call center. And it got reset a lot because there wasn't a lot of friction. There was no, at the time, two-factor authentication. If you didn't remember it, you just fill in a password reset form and eventually you'll be able to reset your password. But it was affecting multiple hundreds of millions of customers along the way. And what that taught me was, even if you're 90% right, you've got to know what the 10% is and who's in it. And so this notion of looking in the dark corners for the monsters, I think becomes really, really smart when you're dealing with call centers, where you've got to believe that at least 80% of the people who come to work every day set out to do the best job they can possibly do. But some days there are monsters, and they could be imagined monsters, but they could be real. You've got to go looking for them. Don't start at 1 and try and get to 80 and feel good about everybody you met was a great person. Go and find the 20% and go and have a conversation with those guys and figure out what it is that is happening in their world, which is driving the experience backwards. And I suspect that the brands that do a great job at profiling their customer sat numbers or their NPS numbers or their whichever KPI they want to use to measure quality are very good at managing the dark spaces of their channels. I suspect that First Direct Bank do more in the dark than they do in the light. It cannot be a coincidence that they keep staying at the top of that table, but every bank kind of must know how to be like First Direct, right? What is it that they're doing differently?
They're looking for the monsters.
They're looking for the monsters. So I think that that's a great, way to come to work each day, is to go and find a monster and figure out what to do with it.
Oh, absolutely love that. I love that. So I think we've kind of wrapped up in terms of what's next for the contact center industry and, looking for the monsters. But what's ahead for you? What are you doing at the moment, Mark? You've just started on a new project.
Yeah, so I'm with a company called Flagstone down in London, a cash management platform, and they are going through some growing pains. They have great systems, they've got great infrastructure, they've got an amazing product, they've got great customers. Now that the interest rate's going up for savings, great customers are appearing, which is fascinating. So they're going through that scaling challenge. But what it's also showing is that while you're growing, you need somebody behind you just catching what gets dropped along the way. And so, I'm helping figure out the customer onboarding journey, so user journey mapping, but not starting from zero, starting with a very nicely prepared journey map, great tools being used to go and visualize that. And yet there's a backlog, the curse of the call center, or the curse of the contact center. There's a backlog of people waiting to get their answers. And just lifting the layers up a little bit, what's happening is that processes are driving that, but inconsistency more so. So when I think back to the question at the beginning about digital transformation, it's a behavioral challenge which is representing itself in a digital sphere. And so what I'm doing is helping customers and internal stakeholders navigate this new way of living in a product world. And that means all the skills that have been learned with Virgin and O2 and Microsoft and Skype and Zuto, they're all coming back to become skills that you can lean back into and go, you know what, I think the problem is that bit of knowledge is in the wrong place. Because I've just asked 9 people if they know where that knowledge is, and they've all told me 9 different answers. So we don't need to transform anything. We just need to go and put it where they're looking. And I think that really changes the way that you can accrue improvements. And so this notion of marginal gains in the sports world or 1% better every day is really what's happening. I'm not here to change the product or to tell them which new tools to go and procure. They've got great tools. They just need to change behaviors internally to influence behaviors externally. And it's a fascinating place to be. And it's a great crowd of people who, you know, when I tell them about the millennium bug, look at me glazed over and wonder what on earth I'm talking about. So, you know, everything I've got to learn is in that room next door.
Yeah, excellent. So anybody wanting to reach out to you, Mark, I'm guessing you'd be happy for them to reach out to you, because especially now you're saying that they've got all the tools and it doesn't need to be a costly exercise to transform. It's about aligning what they've already got. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you for more information, where can they reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to go. My contact information is in there. I'm an active participant in the community, so you know, LinkedIn would be a great first place to go. And if we're already connected, then you know, let's get talking again.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure. I can't believe we've nearly gone to the hour there, but it's fascinating to hear from the customer experience and from the transformation and planning side of things, and just hear a different angle. So hopefully it's you know, it's informed, it's inspired, and that, you know, people will know a little bit more about how they should build relationships with the different stakeholders, like you've mentioned. So thanks so much for today. For everyone else, our next Talk and Talent is a different angle yet again. It's on Wednesday, the 15th of March, and we'll be going live at 12 o'clock, and we're talking about emotional intelligence and how to use emotional intelligence in the contact centre, not only to recruit people, but to retrain and engage with your employees. And it's just another area to look at. It's something that we all can do, and we just need to practice. So join us on the 15th of March, and it's the ex-head of HR from Tombola, who had a huge operation up in Sunderland. So he's come to talk to us all about emotional intelligence. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll see you all again soon.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you.